I'm happy. Thank you, Angie. I just did! And I'm wearing my Harry Potter pants, too. You got me my Hogwarts shirt. I really appreciate it, Angie. I appreciate it so much. If anybody else wants to send me Hogwarts gifts, feel free. Angie has sent 2. Ooh, I grabbed the wrong book. I'm so excited to read the 3rd book that I already grabbed this. That I grabbed it. Yeah, if anybody else wants to send me Hogwarts, stuff. I got a tank top from Angie. She's bought me the 3rd Harry Potter book illustrated. You know, what's next? I'm gonna get a magic wand. Maybe a witch's hat. Ooh. I was in the barn today. I got some hay in my bra. Alrighty. Hi, Brian. Oh, he left it already. I stopped showing boobs. Okay. Oh, hi, Auntie Amber. We're getting ready to read. Okay, I got my coffee. Which is cold now, but still delicious. Okay, and dinner is in the oven. All right, so we are on chapter 12 of Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. Chapter 12 is the Polyjuice potion. And it's got a pretty picture. All right, we remember what the Polyjuice potion is for, right, guys? I don't know. So they are going to take the Polyjuice potion so they can turn themselves into Slytherins because they want to question Malfoy. Because they think that Malfoy is the heir of Slytherin and he opened the chamber. So just a little recap. And now we know that Harry is a Parselmouth, which means he can speak to snakes. And that is not something that just any old wizard can do. In fact, the last person that they knew so far who could do it was Salazar Slytherin, and that was a long time ago. Yep. Alrighty. So, chapter 12, the Polyjuice potion. They stepped up. Oh, and he was being taken by Professor McGonagall to go see Professor Dumbledore. So we're going to find out about that too. Because Nearly Headless Nick was just found paralyzed, and Colin Creevey, the annoying first year who likes to follow around Harry with the camera. All right. They stepped off the stone staircase at the top, and Professor McGonagall rapped on the door. It opened silently, and they entered. Professor McGonagall told Harry to wait and left him there alone. Harry looked around. One thing was certain. Of all of the teachers' offices Harry had visited so far this year, Dumbledore's was by far the most interesting. If he hadn't been scared out of his wits that he was about to be thrown out of school, he would have been very pleased to have a chance to look around. It was a large and beautiful circular room full of funny little noises. A number of curious silver instruments stood on spindly-legged tables, whirling and emitting little puffs of smoke. The walls were covered with portraits of old headmasters and headmistresses, all of whom were snoozing gently in their frames. There was also an enormous claw-footed desk, and sitting on a shelf behind it, a shabby, tattered wizard's hat, the Sorting Hat. Harry hesitated. He cast a weary eye around the sleeping witches and wizards on the walls. Surely it couldn't hurt if he took the hat down and tried it on again? Just to make sure it had put him in the right house. He walked quietly behind the desk, lifted the hat from its shelf, and lowered it slowly over his head. It was much too large and slipped down over his ears, just as it had done the last time he put it on. Harry stared at the black inside of the hat, waiting. Then a small voice said in his ear, "Bee in your bonnet, Harry Potter?" Yes, Harry muttered. Sorry to bother you. I wanted to ask... You've been wondering whether I put you in the right house, said the hat smartly. Yes, you were particularly difficult to place, but I stand by what I said before. Harry's heart leapt. You would have done well in Slytherin. Harry's stomach plummeted. He grabbed the point of the hat and pulled it off. It hung limply in his hand, grubby and faded. Harry pushed it back onto its shelf, feeling sick. You're wrong, he said aloud to the still and silent hat. It didn't move. Harry backed away, watching it. And then a strange gagging noise behind him made him wheel around. He wasn't alone after all. Standing on a golden perch behind the door was a decrepit-looking bird which resembled a half-plucked turkey. Harry stared at it, and the bird stared balefully back, making its gagging noise again. Harry thought it looked very ill. Its eyes were dull, and even as Harry watched, a couple more feathers fell out of its tail. Harry was just thinking that all he needed was for Dumbledore's pet bird to die while he was alone in his office with it, when the bird burst into flames. Harry yelled in shock and backed away into the desk. He looked feverishly around in case there was a glass of water somewhere, but he couldn't see one. The bird, meanwhile, had become a fireball. It gave one loud shriek, and the next second there was nothing but a smoldering pile of ash on the floor. The office door opened. Dumbledore came in and looked very somber. Professor, Harry gasped. Your bird! I didn't do anything. He just caught fire. To Harry's astonishment, Dumbledore smiled. About time, too, he said. He's been looking dreadful for days. I've been telling him to get a move on. He chuckled at the stunned look on Harry's face. Fawkes is a phoenix, Harry. Phoenixes burst into flame when it's time for them to die and are reborn from the ashes. Watch him. Harry looked down in time to see a tiny, wrinkled, newborn bird poke its head out of the ashes. It was quite as ugly as the first one. It's a shame you had to see him on a burning day, said Dumbledore, seating himself behind the desk. He's really very handsome most of the time. Wonderful red and gold plumage. Fascinating creatures, phoenixes. They can carry immensely heavy loads, their tears have healing powers, and they make highly faithful pets. In the shock of Fawkes' death, of Fawkes catching fire, Harry had forgotten what he was there for, but it all came back to him as Dumbledore settled himself in the high-backed chair behind the desk and fixed Harry with his penetrating light blue stare. Before Dumbledore could speak another word, however, the door of the office flew open with an alarming bang, and Hagrid burst in, a wild look in his eyes, his baklava perched on top of his shaggy black head, and the dead rooster was swinging from his hand. It wasn't Harry, Professor Dumbledore, said Hagrid urgently. I was talking to him seconds before the kid was found. He never had time, sir. Dumbledore tried to say something, but Hagrid was ranting on, waving the rooster around in his agitation, sending feathers everywhere. It couldn't have been him. I'll swear it in front of the Ministry of Magic if I have to. Hagrid, well, you've got the wrong boy, sir. I know Harry never... Hagrid, said Dumbledore loudly. I do not think that Harry attacked those people. Oh, said Hagrid, the rooster falling limply at his side. Right. I'll wait outside then, Headmaster. He stepped out, looking embarrassed. You don't think it was me, Professor? Harry repeated hopefully as Dumbledore brushed rooster feathers off his desk. No, Harry, I don't, said Dumbledore, though his face was somber again. But I still want to talk to you. Harry waited nervously while Dumbledore considered him, the tip of his long fingers together. I must ask you, Harry, whether there is anything you'd like to tell me, he said gently. Anything at all. Harry didn't know what to say. He thought of Malfoy shouting, You'll be next, mudbloods, and of the Polyjuice potion simmering away in Moaning Myrtle's bathroom. Then he thought of the disembodied voice he had heard twice, and remembered what Ron had said. Hearing voices no one else can hear isn't a good sign, even in the wizarding world. He thought, too, about what everyone was saying about him, and his growing dread that he was somehow connected with Salazar Slytherin. "No," said Harry. "There isn't anything, Professor." The double attack on Justin and nearly headless Nick turned what had hereunto been nervousness into real panic. Curiously, it was nearly headless Nick's fate that seemed to worry people most. What could possibly do that to a ghost? People asked each other. What terrible power could harm someone who was already dead? There was almost a stampede to book seats on the Hogwarts Express so that students could go home for Christmas. At this rate, we'll be the only ones left, Ron told Harry and Hermione. Us, Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle. What a jolly holiday it's going to be. Crabbe and Goyle, who always did whatever Malfoy did, had signed up to stay over the holidays too. But Harry was glad that most people were leaving. He was tired of people skirting around him in the corridors as though he was about to sprout fangs or spit poison. Tired of all the muttering, pointing, and hissing as he passed. Fred and George, however, found all of this very funny. They went out of their way to march ahead of Harry down the corridors, shouting, "Make way for the heir of Slytherin! Seriously evil wizard coming through!" Percy was deeply disapproving of this behavior. "It's not a laughing matter," he said coldly. "Oh, get out of the way, Percy," said Fred. "Harry's in a hurry." "Yeah, he's nipping off to the Chamber of Secrets for a cup of tea with this fanged servant," said George, chortling. Ginny didn't find it amusing either. "Oh, don't!" she wailed every time Fred asked Harry loudly what he was planning to attack next, or George pretended to ward Harry off with large cloves of garlic when they met. Harry didn't mind. It made him feel better that Fred and George, at least, thought the idea of his being Slytherin's heir was quite ludicrous. But their antics seemed to be aggravating Draco Malfoy, who looked increasingly sour each time he saw them at it. "It's like he's really bursting to say it's him," said Ron knowingly. "You know how he hates everyone beating him at anything, and you're getting all the credit for his dirty work." "Not for long," said Hermione in a satisfied tone. "The Polyjuice potion's nearly ready. We'll be getting the truth out of him any day now." As the term ended, a silence deep as the snow on the grounds descended over the castle. Harry found it peaceful rather than gloomy, and enjoyed the fact that he, Hermione, and the Weasleys had the run of Gryffindor Tower, which meant they could play Exploding Snap loudly without bothering anyone, or practice dueling in private. Fred, George, and Ginny had chosen to stay at school rather than visit Bill in Egypt with Mr. and Mrs. Weasley. Percy, who disapproved of what he termed their childish behavior, didn't spend much time in the Gryffindor common room. He had already told them pompously that he was only staying there over Christmas because it was his duty as prefect to support the teachers during this troubled time. Christmas morning dawned, cold and white. Harry and Ron, the only ones left in their dormitory, were woken very early by Hermione, who burst in, fully dressed and carrying presents for them both. "Wake up!" she said loudly, pulling back the curtains on the window. "Hermione, you're not supposed to be in here," said Ron, shielding his eyes against the light. "Well, Merry Christmas to you too," said Hermione, throwing him his present. "I've been up for nearly an hour, adding more lace wings to the potion. It's ready." Harry sat up, suddenly wide awake. "Hi, guys. Hi, Andrea. My Scentsy shipped. I'm super excited." "Are you sure?" "Positive," said Hermione, shifting Scabbers the rat so that she could sit down on the end of his four-poster. "If we're going to do it, I would say it should be tonight." At that moment, Hedwig swooped into the room carrying a very small package in her beak. "Hello," said Harry happily as she landed on his bed. "Are you speaking to me again?" She nibbled his ear in an affectionate sort of way, which was a far better present than the one she had brought him, which turned out to be from the Dursleys. They had sent Harry a toothpick, and a note telling him to find out whether he'd be able to stay at Hogwarts for the summer holidays, too. The rest of Harry's Christmas presents were far more satisfactory. Hagrid had sent him a large tin of treacle fudge, which Harry decided to soften by the fire before eating. Ron had given him a book called Flying with the Cannons, a book of interesting facts about his favorite Quidditch team. And Hermione had bought him a luxury eagle feather quill. Harry opened the last present to find a new hand-knitted jumper from Mrs. Weasley and a large plum cake. He pulled up her card with a fresh surge of guilt, thinking about Mr. Weasley's car, which hadn't been seen since its crash into the Whomping Willow, in that bout of rule-breaking that he and Ron were... Yeah, so he was thinking about crashing the car into the Whomping Willow and thinking about their next bout of rule-breaking. No one, not even someone dreading taking the Polyjuice potion later, could fail to enjoy Christmas dinner at Hogwarts. The Great Hall looked magnificent. Not only were there a dozen frost-covered Christmas trees and thick streamers of holly and mistletoe crisscrossing the ceiling, but enchanted snow was falling, warming dry from the ceiling. Dumbledore led them in a few of his favorite carols, Hagrid booming more and more loudly with every goblet of eggnog he consumed. Percy, who hadn't noticed that Fred had bewitched his prefect badge so that it now read Pinhead, kept asking them all what they were snickering at. Harry didn't even care that Draco Malfoy was making loud, snide remarks about his new jumper from the Slytherin table. With a bit of luck, Malfoy would be getting his own comeuppance in a few hours' time. Harry and Ron had barely finished their third helpings of Christmas pudding when Hermione ushered them out of the hall to finish their plans for the evening. "We still need a bit of the people we're changing into," said Hermione, matter-of-factly, as though she was sending them to the supermarket for washing powder. "And obviously, it'd be best if you can get something of Crabbe's and Goyle's. They're Malfoy's best friend. He'd tell them anything. And we should also make sure to get the real Crabbe and... We should also make sure that the real Crabbe and Goyle can't burst in on us while we're interrogating him." "I've got it all worked out," she went on smoothly, ignoring Harry and Ron's stupid faces. She pulled up 2 plump chocolate cakes. "I filled these with a simple sleeping draught. All you have to do is make sure Crabbe and Goyle find them. You know how greedy they are. They're bound to eat them. Once they're asleep, pull a few of their hairs and hide them in a broom cupboard." Harry and Ron looked incredulously at each other. "Hermione, I don't think... This could go seriously wrong." But Hermione had a steely glint in her eye, not unlike one of Professor McGonagall's. "The potion will be useless without Crabbe and Goyle's hair," she said sternly. "You do want to investigate Malfoy, don't you?" All right, said Harry. "But what about you? Whose hair are you ripping out?" "I've already got mine," said Hermione brightly, pulling a tiny bottle out of her pocket and showing them the single hair inside. Hang on 1 second. I have an order for cupcakes that are being picked up. I need to let her know that Damon's going to bring them out. Thank you for being patient. "Remember Millicent Bulstrode wrestling me in the dueling club? She left these on my robes while she was trying to strangle me, and she's gone home for Christmas." "So I'll have to tell the Slytherins I've decided to come back." When Hermione had bustled off to check on the Polyjuice potion again, Ron turned to Harry with a doom-laden expression. "Have you ever heard of a plan where so many things could go wrong?" But to Harry and Ron's utter amazement, stage 1 of the operation went just as smoothly as Hermione had said. They lurked in the deserted entrance hall after Christmas tea, waiting for Crabbe and Goyle, who had remained alone at the Slytherin table, shoveling down 4th helpings of trifle. Harry had perched the chocolate cakes on the end of the banisters. When they spotted Crabbe and Goyle coming out of the Great Hall, Harry and Ron hid quickly behind a suit of armor next to the front door. "How thick can you get?" Ron whispered ecstatically as Crabbe gleefully pointed out the cakes to Goyle and grabbed them. Grinning stupidly, they stuffed the cakes whole into their large mouths. For a moment, both of them chewed greedily, looks of triumph on their faces. Then, without the smallest change of expression, they both keeled over backwards onto the floor. The most difficult bit was hiding them in the cupboard across the hall. Once they were safely stowed amongst the buckets and mops, Harry yanked out a couple of bristles that covered Goyle's forehead. And Ron pulled out several of Crabbe's hairs. They also stole their shoes, because their own were far too small for Crabbe and Goyle-sized feet. Then, still stunned at what they had just done, they sprinted up to Moaning Myrtle's bathroom. They could hardly see for the thick black smoke issuing from the cubicle in which Hermione was stirring the cauldron. Pulling the robes of their faces, Harry and Ron knocked softly on the door. They heard the scrape of the lock and Hermione emerged, shiny-faced and looking anxious. Behind her, they heard the gloop-gloop of the bubbling, treacle-thick potion. 3 glass tumblers stood ready on the toilet seat. "Did you get them?" Hermione asked breathlessly. Harry showed her Goyle's hair. "Good, and I snuck these spare robes out of the laundry," Hermione said, holding up a small sack. "You'll need bigger sizes once you're Crabbe and Goyle." They remembered the shoes, she remembered the robes. The 3 of them stared into the cauldron. Close up, the potion looked like thick, dark mud, bubbling sluggishly. Oh, I forgot to show you Crabbe and Goyle. "All right, I'm sure I've done everything right," said Hermione, nervously reading the splotched pages of Most Potent Potions. "It looks like the book says it should, once we drink it, we'll have exactly an hour before we change back into ourselves." "Now what?" Ron whispered. "All right, we separate it into 3 glasses and add the hairs." Hermione ladled large dollops of the potion into each glass. Then, her hand trembling, she shook Millicent Bulstrode's hair out of its bottle and into the first glass. The potion hissed loudly like a boiling kettle and frothed madly. A second later, it turned a sick sort of yellow. "Ugh, essence of Millicent Bulstrode," said Ron, eyeing it with loathing. "Bet it tastes disgusting." "Add yours, then," said Hermione. Harry dropped Goyle hair into the middle glass, and Ron put Crabbe hair in the last one. Both glasses hissed and frothed. Goyle's turned the khaki color of boogers, and Crabbe's a dark, murky brown. "Hang on," said Harry, as Ron and Hermione reached for their glasses. "We'd better not drink them all in here. Once we turn into Crabbe and Goyle, we won't fit, and Millicent Bulstrode's no pixie." "Good thinking," said Ron, unlocking the door. "We'll take separate cubicles." Careful not to spill a drop of his Polyjuice potion, Harry slipped into the middle cubicle. "Ready?" he said. "Ready!" called Ron and Hermione's voices. 1, 2, 3. Pinching his nose, Harry drank the potion down in 2 large gulps. It tasted like overcooked cabbage. Oh, you gave him to him already? Yep. Awesome. Immediately, his insides started writhing as though he just swallowed live snakes. Doubled up, he wondered whether he was going to be sick. And then a burning sensation spread rapidly from his stomach to the very ends of his fingers and toes. Next, bringing him gasping to all fours, came a horrible melting feeling as the skin all over his body bubbled like hot wax, and before his eyes, his hands began to grow. The fingers thickened, the nails broadened, and the knuckles were bulging like bolts. His shoulders stretched painfully, and then a prickling in his forehead told him that hair was creeping down towards his eyebrows. His robes ripped as his chest expanded like a barrel bursting its hoops. His feet were agony in shoes 4 sizes too small. As suddenly as it had started, everything stopped. Harry lay face down on the cold stone floor, listening to Myrtle gurgling morosely in the end toilet. With difficulty, he kicked off his shoes and stood up. So this is what it felt like, being Goyle. His large hands trembled. He pulled off his old robes, which were hanging a foot above his ankles, and pulled on the spare ones and laced up Goyle's boat-like shoes. He reached up to brush his hair out of his eyes and met only the short growth of wiry bristles low on his forehead. And then he realized that his glasses were clouding his eyes, because Goyle obviously didn't need them. He took them off and called, "Are you two okay?" Goyle's low rasp of a voice issued from his mouth. "Yeah," came the deep grunt of Crabbe from the right. Harry unlocked the door and stepped in front of the cracked mirror. Goyle stared back at him out of dull, deep-set eyes. Harry searched his scratched his ear, so did Goyle. Ron's door opened. They stared at each other. Except that he looked pale and shocked, Ron was indistinguishable from Crabbe, from the pudding basin haircut to the long gorilla arms. "This is unbelievable," said Ron, approaching the mirror and prodding Crabbe's flat nose. "Unbelievable." "We'd better get going," said Harry, loosening the watch that was cutting into Goyle's thick wrist. "We've still got to find out where the Slytherin common room is. I only hope we can find someone to follow." Harry, who had been gazing at Harry, said, "You don't know how bizarre it is to see Goyle thinking." He banged on Hermione's door. "Come on, we need to go." A high-pitched voice answered him. I don't think I'll be coming after all. You go on without me." "Hermione, we know Millicent Bulstrode's ugly. No one's going to know it's you." "No, really, I don't think I'll come. You two hurry up. You're wasting time." Harry looked at Ron, bewildered. "That looks more like Goyle," said Ron. That's how he looks every time a teacher asks him a question." "Hermione, are you okay?" said Harry through the door. "Fine, I'm fine. Go on." Harry looked at his watch. 5 of their precious 60 minutes had already passed. "We'll meet you back here, all right?" he said. Harry and Ron opened the door of the bathroom carefully, checking that the coast was clear, and set off. "Don't swing your arms like that," Harry muttered to Ron. "Huh?" "Crabbe holds them sort of stiff." "How's this?" "Yeah, that's better." They went down the marble staircase. All they needed now was a Slytherin whom they could follow to the Slytherin common room, but there was nobody around. "Any ideas?" muttered Harry. "The Slytherins always come up to breakfast from over there," said Ron, nodding at the entrance of the dungeons. The words had barely left his mouth when a girl with long curly hair emerged from the entrance. "Excuse me," said Ron, hurrying up to her. "We've forgotten the way to our common room." "I beg your pardon," said the girl stiffly. "Our common room? I'm a Ravenclaw." She walked away, looking suspiciously back at them. Harry and Ron hurried down the stone steps into the darkness, their footsteps echoing particularly loudly as Crabbe and Goyle's huge feet hit the floor, feeling that this wasn't going to be as easy as they hoped. The labyrinth passages were deserted. They walked deeper and deeper under the school, constantly checking their watches to see how much time they had left. After a quarter of an hour, just when they were getting desperate, they heard a sudden movement ahead. "Ha!" said Ron excitedly. "There's one of them now!" The figure was emerging from a side room. As they hurried nearer, however, their hearts sank. It wasn't a Slytherin. It was just Percy. "What are you doing down here?" said Ron in surprise. Percy looked affronted. "That," he said stiffly, "is none of your business. It's Crabbe, isn't it?" Yeah, said Ron. "Well, get off to your dormitory," said Percy sternly. "It's not safe to go wandering around dark corridors these days." "You are," Ron pointed out. "I," said Percy, drawing himself up, "am a prefect. Nothing's about to attack me." A voice suddenly echoed behind Harry and Ron. Draco was striding towards them, and for the first time in his life, Harry was pleased to see him. "There you are," he drawled, looking at them. "Have you two been pigging out in the Great Hall all this time? I've been looking for you. Wanted to show you something really funny." Malfoy glanced witheringly at Percy. "And what are you doing down here, Weasley?" he sneered. Percy looked outraged. "You'll want to show a bit more respect to a school prefect," he said. "I don't like your attitude." Malfoy sneered and motioned Harry and Ron to follow him. Harry almost said something apologetic to Percy, but caught himself just in time. He and Ron hurried up after Malfoy, who said as they turned to the next passage, "That Peter Weasley—" "Percy," said Ron, correcting him automatically. "Whatever," said Malfoy. "I've noticed him sneaking around a lot lately. I bet I know what he's up to. He thinks he's going to catch Slytherin's heir single-handed." He gave a short laugh. Harry and Ron exchanged excited looks. Malfoy paused by a stretch of bare, damp stone wall. "What's the new password again?" he said to Harry. Said Harry. "Oh, yeah, pure blood." And said Malfoy, not listening. The stone door concealed in the wall slid open. Malfoy marched through it, and Harry and Ron followed him. The Slytherin common room was a long, low underground room with a rough stone walls and ceiling, from which round, greenish lamps were hanging on chains. A fire was crackling under an elaborately carved mantelpiece ahead of them, and several Slytherins were silhouetted around it in carved chairs. "Wait here," said Malfoy to Harry and Ron, motioning them to a pair of empty chairs set back from the fire. "I'll go and get it. My father just sent it to me." Wondering what Malfoy was going to show them, Harry and Ron sat down and tried their best to look at home. Sorry, guys. I don't know how I keep yawning. Malfoy came back a minute later holding what looked like a newspaper cutting. He thrust it under Ron's nose. "This'll give you a laugh," he said. Harry saw Ron's eyes widen in shock. He read the cutting quickly and gave a very forced laugh and handed it to Harry. It had been clipped out of the Daily Prophet, and it said, "Water!" It said, "Inquiry at the Ministry of Magic. Arthur Weasley, head of the Misuse of Muggle Artifacts Office, was today fined 50 galleons for bewitching a Muggle car. Mr. Lucius Malfoy, a governor of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, where the enchanted car crashed earlier this year, called today for Mr. Weasley's resignation. Weasley has brought the ministry into disrepute," Mr. Malfoy told our reporter. "He is clearly unfit to draw up our laws, and his ridiculous Muggle Protections Act should be scrapped immediately." Mr. Weasley was unavailable for comment, although his wife told reporters to clear off or she'd set the family ghoul on them. "Well," said Malfoy impatiently as Harry handed the cutting back to him, "don't you think it's funny?" "Ha ha ha ha," said Harry bleakly. "Arthur Weasley loves Muggles so much he would snap his wand in half and go and join them," said Malfoy scornfully. "You'd never know the Weasleys were purebloods the way they behave." Ron's, or rather Crab's, face was contorted with fury. "What's up with you, Crab?" snapped Malfoy. "Stomachache," Ron grunted. "Well, go up to the hospital wing and give all those mudbloods a kick for me," said Malfoy, snickering. "You know, I'm surprised the Daily Prophet hasn't reported any of these attacks yet," he went on thoughtfully. "I suppose Dumbledore's trying to hush it all up. He'd be sacked if it doesn't stop soon. Father's always said Dumbledore's the worst thing that ever happened to this place. He loves Muggleborns. A decent headmaster would never have let slime like that Creevy in." Malfoy started taking pictures with an imaginary camera and did a cruel but accurate impression of Colin. "Potter, can I have your picture, Potter? Can I have your autograph? Can I lick your shoes? Please, Potter." He dropped his hands and looked at Harry and Ron. "What's the matter with you two?" Far too late, Harry and Ron forced themselves to laugh, but Malfoy seemed satisfied. Perhaps Crabbe and Goyle were always slow on the uptake. "Saint Potter, the Mudblood's friend," said Malfoy slowly. "He's another one with no proper wizard feeling, or he wouldn't be around with that jacked-up Granger Mudblood. People think he's Slytherin's heir." Harry and Ron waited with bated breath. Malfoy was surely seconds away from telling them it was him, but then... "I wish I knew who it was," said Malfoy petulantly. "I could help them." "I'm sorry. I've been awake since 5:30 this morning. Early." Ron's jaw dropped so that Crabbe's face looked even more gormless than usual. Fortunately, Malfoy didn't notice. Oh. Draco Malfoy's face. Harry, thinking fast, said, "You must have some idea who's behind it all." "You know I haven't, Goyle. How many times do I have to tell you?" snapped Malfoy. "And Father won't tell me anything about the last time the chamber was opened either. Of course, it was 50 years ago, so it was before his time. But he knows all about it. He says that it was all kept quiet, and it looks suspicious if I knew too much about it. But I know one thing. The last time the Chamber of Secrets was opened, a mudblood died. So I bet it's only a matter of time before one of them's killed this time. I hope it's Granger," he said with relish. I didn't lick the book. I stuck my tongue out at the face of Draco Malfoy, 'cause bleh. Ron was clenching Goyle's gigantic fists. Feeling that it would be a bit of a giveaway if Ron punched Malfoy, Harry shot him a warning look and said, "Do you know if the person who opened the chamber last time was caught?" "Oh yeah, whoever it was expelled," said Malfoy. "They're probably still in Azkaban." "Azkaban?" said Harry, puzzled. "Azkaban, the wizard prison, Goyle," said Malfoy, looking at him in disbelief. "Honestly, if you were any slower, you'd be going backwards." He shifted restlessly in his chair and said, "Father says to keep my head down and let the heir of Slytherin get on with it. He says the school needs ridding of all the mudblood filth, but not to get mixed up in it. Of course, he's got a lot on his plate at the moment. You know the Ministry of Magic raided our manor last week." Harry tried to force Doyle's dull face into a look of concern. "Yeah," said Malfoy. "Luckily, they didn't find much. Father's got some very valuable dark art stuff. But luckily, we've got our own secret chamber under the drawing room floor." "Ho-ho!" said Ron. Malfoy looked at him. So did Harry. Ron blushed. Even his hair was turning red. His nose was also slowly lengthening. Their hour was up. Ron was turning back into himself, and from the look of horror he was suddenly giving Harry, he must be too. They both jumped to their feet. "Medicine for my stomach," Ron grunted, and without further ado they sprinted the length of the Slytherin common room and hurled themselves at the stone wall and dashed out the passage, hoping against hope that Malfoy hadn't noticed anything. Harry could feel his feet slipping around in Goyle's huge shoes and almost had to hoist up his robes as he shrank. They crashed up the steps into the dark entrance hall, which was full of muffled pounding coming from the cupboard where they'd locked Crabbe and Goyle. Leaving their shoes outside the cupboard door, they sprinted in their socks up the marble staircase towards Moaning Myrtle's bathroom. Well, it wasn't a complete waste of time, Ron panted, closing the bathroom door behind them. I know we still haven't found out who's doing the attacks, but I'm going to write to Dad tomorrow and tell him to check under the Malfoys' drawing room. Harry checked his face in the cracked mirror. He was back to normal. He put his glasses on as Ron hammered on the door of Hermione's cubicle. Hermione, come out! We've got loads to tell you. Go away! Squeaked Hermione. Harry and Ron looked at each other. What's the matter? Said Ron. You must be back to normal by now. We are. But Moaning Myrtle glided suddenly through the cubicle door. Harry had never seen her looking so happy. Oh, you wait and see, she said. It's awful. They heard the lock slide back, and Hermione emerged, sobbing, her robes pulled up over her head. What's up? Said Ron uncertainly. Have you still got Millicent's nose or something? Hermione let her robes fall, and Ron backed into the sink. Her face was covered in black fur. Her eyes had gone yellow, and there were long, pointed ears poking through her hair. It was cat hair, she howled. Millicent Bulstrode must have a cat, and the Polyjuice potion isn't supposed to be used for animal transformations. Uh-oh, said Ron. You're going to be teased something dreadful, said Myrtle happily. It's okay, Hermione, said Harry quickly. We'll take you up to the hospital wing. Madame Pomfrey never asked too many questions. It took a long time to persuade Hermione to leave the bathroom. Moaning Myrtle sped them on their way with a hearty guffaw. Wait till everyone finds out you've got a tail. That was the end of that chapter. What time is it? I should be able to read this one. Chapter 13. Oh, wait. Let's see if you can read. Can you see her? It's Hermione as a cat. It's not midnight. I have dinner in the oven. That's why I was checking the time. I planned it so that we can eat directly after we're done with this, and we're going to watch a movie. Chapter 13. The Very Secret Diary. Hermione remained in the hospital wing for several weeks. There was a flurry of rumor about her disappearance when the rest of the school arrived back from their Christmas holiday, because of course everyone thought that she had been attacked. So many students filed past the hospital wing trying to catch a glimpse of her that Madame Pomfrey took out her curtains again and placed them around Hermione's bed, to spare her the shame of being seen with a furry face. Harry and Ron went to visit her every evening. When the new term started, they brought her each day's homework. If I'd spreaded whiskers, I'd take a break from work, said Ron, tipping a stack of books under Hermione's bedside table one evening. Don't be silly, Ron. I've got to keep up, said Hermione briskly. Her spirits were greatly improved by the fact that all of the hair had now gone from her face, and her eyes were slowly turning back to brown. I don't suppose you've got any new leads, she said, so that Madame Pomfrey couldn't hear her. Nothing, said Harry gloomily. I was so sure it was Malfoy, said Ron, for the 100th time. What's that? Said Harry, pointing to something gold sticking out from under Hermione's pillow. Just a get well card, said Hermione hastily, trying to poke it out of sight. But Ron was too quick for her. He pulled it out, flicked it open, and read aloud. To Miss Granger, I wish you a speedy recovery from your concerned teacher, Professor Gilderoy Lockhart, Order of Merlin, 3rd class, honorary member of the Dark Force Defense League, and 5 times winner of Witch Weekly's Most Charming Smile Award. Ron looked up at Hermione, disgusted. You sleep with this under your pillow? But Hermione was spared answering by Madame Pomfrey sweeping over to her with her evening dose of medicine. Is Lockhart the smarmiest bloke you've ever met, or what? Said Ron to Harry as they left the dormitory and started up the stairs towards Gryffindor Tower. Snape had given them so much homework, Harry thought he was likely to be in the 6th year before he finished it. Ron was just saying he wished he'd asked Hermione how many rat tails they were supposed to add to an hair-raising potion. A hair-raising potion. That makes sense. When an angry outburst from the floor above reached their ears. That's Filch! Harry muttered as they hurried up the stairs and paused out of sight, listening hard. You don't think someone's been attacked? Said Ron tensely. They stood still, their heads inclined towards Filch's voice, which sounded quite hysterical. Even more work for me, mopping all night like I haven't got enough to do. No, this is the final straw. I'm going to Dumbledore. His footsteps receded, and they heard a distant door slam. They poked their heads around the corner. Filch had clearly been manning his usual lookout post. They were once again on the spot where Mrs. Norris had been attacked. They saw at a glance what Filch had been shouting about. A great flood of water stretched over half the corridor, and it looked as though it was still seeping from under the door of Moaning Myrtle's bathroom. Now Filch had stopped shouting, they could hear Myrtle's wails echoing off the bathroom walls. Now what's gotten into her? Said Ron. I don't know, let's go and see, said Harry, holding their robes above their ankles as they walked through the great wash of water to the door, bearing its out-of-order sign, ignoring it, as always, and entered. Moaning Myrtle was crying, if possible, louder and harder than ever before. She seemed to be hiding down her usual toilet. It was dark in the bathroom, because the candles had been extinguished in the great rush of water that had left both walls and floors soaking wet. What's up, Myrtle? Said Harry. Who's that? Glogged Myrtle miserably. Come to throw something else at me? Harry waded across her cubicle and said, Why would I throw something at you? Don't ask me, Myrtle said, emerging with a wave of yet more water, which splashed along the already sopping floor. Here I am, minding my own business, and someone thinks it's funny to throw a book at me. But it can't hurt if someone throws something at you, said Harry reasonably. I mean, it'd just go right through you, wouldn't it? He had said the wrong thing. Myrtle puffed herself up and shrieked, Let's all throw books at Myrtle, because she can't feel it. 10 points if you can get it through her stomach. 50 points if it goes through her head. Well, ha, ha, ha. What a lovely game. I don't think so. Who threw it at you anyway? Asked Harry. I don't know. I was sitting in the U-bend thinking about death, and it fell right through the top of my head, said Myrtle, glaring at them. It's over there. It got washed out. Harry and Ron looked under the sink where Myrtle was pointing. A small, thin book lay there. It had a shabby black cover and was as wet as everything else in the bathroom. Harry stepped forward to pick it up, and Ron suddenly flung out an arm to hold him back. What? Said Harry. Are you mad? Said Ron. It could be dangerous. Dangerous? Said Harry, laughing. Come off it. How can it be dangerous? You'd be surprised, said Ron, who was looking apprehensively at the book. Some of the books in the ministry's confiscated. Dad told me. There was one that burned your eyes out, and everyone who reads Sonnets of a Sorcerer spoke in limericks for the rest of their lives. And some old witch in Bath had a book that you could never stop reading. You just had to wander around with your nose in it, trying to do everything one-handed. And, all right, I've got the point, said Harry. The little book lay on the floor, nondescript and soggy. Well, we won't find out unless we look at it, he said. He ducked around Ron and picked it up off the floor. Harry saw at once that it was a diary, and the faded year on the cover told him it was 50 years old. He opened it eagerly. On the front page he could just make out the name, T.M. Riddle in smudged ink. Hang on, said Ron, who had approached cautiously and was looking over Harry's shoulder. I know that name. T.M. Riddle got awarded for several services to the school 50 years ago. How on earth do you know that? Said Harry in amazement. Because Filch made me polish his shield about 50 times in detention, said Ron resentfully. That was the one I burped slugs all over. If you'd wiped slime off a name for an hour, you'd remember it too. Harry peeled the wet pages apart. They were completely blank. There wasn't the faintest trace of writing on any of them, not even Auntie Mabel's birthday or dentist 3:30. He never wrote in it, said Harry, disappointed. I wonder why someone wanted to flush it, said Ron. Harry turned the back cover of the book and saw the printed name of a newsagent on Vauxhall Road, London. He must have been Muggle-born, said Harry thoughtfully, to have bought a diary from Vauxhall Road. Well, it's not much use to you, said Ron. He dropped his voice. 50 points if you can get it through Myrtle's nose. Harry, however, pocketed it. Hermione left the hospital wing, de-whiskered, tail-free, and fur-free at the beginning of February. On her first evening back in Gryffindor Tower, Harry showed her T.M. Riddle's diary and told her the story of how they found it. Ooh, it might have hidden powers, said Hermione enthusiastically, taking the diary and looking at it closely. If it has, it's hiding them very well, said Ron. Maybe it's shy. I don't know why you don't chuck it, Harry. I wish I knew why someone did chuck it, said Harry. I wouldn't not mind knowing how Riddle got an award for special services to Hogwarts either. Could have been anything, said Ron. Maybe he got 30 owls or saved a teacher from a giant squid. Maybe he murdered Myrtle. That would have done everyone a favor. But Harry could tell from the arrested look on Hermione's face that she was thinking what he was thinking. What? Said Ron, looking from one to the other. Well, the Chamber of Secrets was opened 50 years ago, wasn't it? He said. That's what Malfoy said. Yeah, said Ron slowly. And this diary is 50 years old, said Hermione, tapping it excitedly. So? Oh, Ron, wake up, snapped Hermione. We know the person who opened the chamber last time was expelled 50 years ago. We know T.M. Riddle got an award for special services to the school 50 years ago. Well, what if Riddle got his special award for catching the heir of Slytherin? His diary would probably tell us everything. Where the chamber is, how to open it, and what sort of creature lives in it. The person who's behind the attacks this time wouldn't want them lying around, would they? That's a brilliant theory, Hermione, said Ron, with just one tiny flaw. There's nothing written in the diary. But Hermione was pulling her wand out of her bag. It must be invisible ink, she whispered. She tapped the diary 3 times and said, Apparitium. Okay. Nothing happened. Undaunted, Hermione shoved her hand into her bag and pulled out what appeared to be a bright red eraser. It's a revealer. I got it in Diagon Alley, she said. She rubbed hard on January the 1st. Nothing happened. I'm telling you, there's nothing to find here. Riddle just got a diary for Christmas and couldn't be bothered filling it in. Harry couldn't explain, even to himself, why he didn't just throw Riddle's diary away. The fact was that even though he knew the diary was blank, he kept absent-mindedly picking it up and turning the pages, as though it was a story he wanted to finish. And while Harry was sure he'd never heard the name T.M. Riddle before, it still seemed to mean something to him, almost as though Riddle was a friend he'd had when he was very small and half forgotten. But this was absurd. Harry never had any friends before Hogwarts. Dudley had made sure of that. Nevertheless, Harry was determined to find out more about Riddle. So, the next day at break, he headed for the trophy room to examine Riddle's special award, accompanied by an interested Hermione and a thoroughly unconvinced Ron, who told them he'd seen enough of the trophy room to last him a lifetime. Riddle's burnished gold shield was tucked away in a corner cabinet. It didn't carry details of why it had been given to him, Good thing, too. If it'd been any even bigger, I'd still be polishing it, said Ron. However, they did find Riddle's name on an old medal of magical merit and on a list of old head boys. He sounds like Percy, said Ron, wrinkling his nose in disgust. Perfect, prefect, head boy, probably top of every class. You say that like it's a bad thing, said Hermione, in a slightly hurt voice. The sun had now begun to shine weakly on Hogwarts again. Inside the castle, the mood had grown more hopeful. There had been no more attacks since those on Justin and nearly Headless Nick, and Madame Pomfrey was pleased to report that the mandrakes were becoming moody and secretive, meaning they were fast leaving childhood. The moment their acne clears up, they'll be ready for repotting again, Harry heard her telling Filch excitedly one afternoon. And after that, it won't be long until we're cutting them up and stewing them. You'll have Mrs. Norris back in no time. Perhaps the heir of Slytherin had lost his or her nerve, thought Harry. It must be getting riskier and riskier to open the Chamber of Secrets, with the school so alert and suspicious. Perhaps the monster, wherever it was even now settling itself down to hibernate for another 50 years. Ernie Macmillan of Hufflepuff didn't take this cheerful view. He was still convinced that Harry was the guilty one, that he had given himself away at the dueling club. Peeves wasn't helping matters. He kept popping up in corridors saying, "Oh, Potter, you rotter!" and now with a dance routine to match. Gilderoy Lockhart seemed to think he himself had made the attack stop. Harry overheard him telling Professor McGonagall so while the Gryffindors were lining up for transfiguration. "I don't think there'll be any more trouble, Minerva," he said, tapping his nose knowingly and winking. "I think the chamber has been locked for good this time. The culprit must have known it was only a matter of time before I caught them. Rather sensible to stop now, before I came down really hard on them." I hate Gilderoy Lockhart. "You know, what the school needs now is a morale booster. Wash away the memories of last term. I wouldn't say any more just now, but I think I know just the thing." He tapped his nose again and strode off. Lockhart's idea of a morale booster became clear at breakfast time on February the 14th. Harry hadn't had much sleep because of a late-running Quidditch practice the night before, and he hurried down the Great Hall slightly late. He thought for a moment that he'd walked through the wrong doors. The walls were covered with large, lurid pink flowers. Worse still, heart-shaped confetti was falling from the pale blue ceiling. Harry went over to the Gryffindor table, where Ron was sitting looking sickened, and Hermione seemed to be coming over rather giddy. "What's going on?" Harry asked them, sitting down and wiping confetti off his bacon. Harry pointed at the teacher's table, apparently too disgusted to speak. Lockhart was wearing lurid pink robes to match the decorations and was waving for silence. The teachers on either side of him were looking stony-faced. From where he sat, Harry could see a muscle going on in Professor McGonagall's cheek. Snape looked as though someone had tried to feed him a large beaker of Skelgro. "Happy Valentine's Day!" Lockhart shouted. "And may I thank the 46 people who have so far sent me cards. Yes, I have taken the liberty of arranging this little surprise for you all, and it doesn't end here." I hate Valentine's Day. Lockhart clapped his hands, and through the doors of the entrance hall marched a dozen surly-looking dwarves. Surly-looking dwarves. Not just any dwarves, however. Lockhart had them all wearing golden wings and carrying harps. "My friendly card-carrying cupids," beamed Lockhart. "They will be roving around the school today delivering your valentines, and the fun doesn't stop here. I'm sure my colleagues will want to enter into the spirit of the occasion. Why not ask Professor Snape to show you how to whip up a love potion? And while you're at it, Professor Flitwick knows more about entrancing enchantments than any wizard I've ever met, the sly old bag." Professor Flitwick buried his face in his hands. Snape was looking as though the first person to ask him for a love potion would be force-fed poison. "Please, Hermione, tell me you weren't one of the 46, said Ron as they left the Great Hall for their first lesson. Hermione suddenly became very interested in searching her bag for her timetable and didn't answer. All day long, the dwarfs kept barging into classes to deliver valentines, to the annoyance of the teachers. And late that afternoon, as the Gryffindors were walking upstairs for charms, one of them caught up with Harry. "Oi, you! Harry Potter!" shouted a particularly grim-looking dwarf, elbowing people out of the way to get to Harry. Hot all over at the thought of being given valentines in front of a queue of first years, which happened to be Ginny Weasley, Harry tried to escape. The dwarf, however, cut his way through the crowd by kicking people's shins and reached him before he got 2 paces. "I've got a musical message to deliver to Harry Potter in person," he said, twanging his harp in a threatening sort of way. "Not here," Harry hissed, trying to escape. "Stay still," grunted the dwarf, grabbing hold of Harry's bag and pulling him back. "Let me go," Harry snarled, tugging. With a large ripping sound, his bag split in 2. His books, wands, parchment, and quill spilled onto the floor, and his ink bottle smashed over the lot. Harry scrambled around, trying to pick it all up before the dwarf started singing, causing something of a hold up in the corridor. Okay. "What's going on here?" came the cold, drawling voice of Draco Malfoy. Harry, startled, shuffled everything feverishly into his ripped bag, desperate to get away before Malfoy could hear his musical valentine. "What's all this commotion?" said another familiar voice as Percy Weasley arrived. Losing his head, Harry tried to make a run for it, but the dwarf seized him around the knees and brought him crashing to the floor. "Right," he said, sitting on Harry's knuckles. "Here is your singing valentine. His eyes are as green as fresh pickled toad. His hair is as dark as a blackboard. I wish he was mine. He's really divine, the hero who conquered the Dark Lord." His eyes are as green as a fresh pickled toad. His hair is as dark as a blackboard. I wish he was mine. He's really divine, the hero who conquered the Dark Lord. Harry would have given all of the gold in Gringotts to evaporate on the spot. Trying valiantly to laugh along with everyone else, he got up, his feet numb from the weight of the dwarf, as Percy did his best to disperse the crowd, some of whom were crying with mirth. Off you go, the bell rang 5 minutes ago. Off to class now," he said, shooing the younger students away. "And you, Malfoy." Harry glanced over and saw Malfoy stoop and snatch up something. Leering, he showed it to Crabbe and Goyle, and Harry realized he got Riddle's diary. "Give that back," said Harry quietly. "Wonder what Potter's written in it," said Malfoy, who obviously hadn't noticed the year on the cover, and thought it was Harry's own diary. A flush fell over the onlookers. Ginny was staring from the diary to Harry, looking terrified. "Hand it over, Malfoy," said Percy sternly. "When I've had a look," said Malfoy, waving the diary tauntingly at Harry. Percy said, "As school prefect," but Harry had lost his temper. He pulled out his wand and shouted, "Expelliarmus!" just as Snape had disarmed Lockhart. So Malfoy found the diary shooting out of his hands and into the air. Ron, grinning broadly, caught it. "Harry," said Percy loudly, "no magic in the corridors. I have to report this, you know." But Harry didn't care. He'd gotten one over on Malfoy, and that was worth 5 points from Gryffindor any day. Malfoy was looking furious, and as Ginny passed him to enter her classroom, he yelled spitefully after her, "I don't think Potter liked your valentine much." Ginny crossed her face with her hands and ran into class. Snarling, Ron pulled out his wand too, but Harry pulled him away. Ron didn't need to spend a hole of charms belching slugs. It wasn't until they had reached Professor Flitwick's class that Harry noticed something rather odd about Riddle's diary. All his other books were drenched in scarlet ink. The book, however, was as clean as it had been before the ink bottle had smashed. He tried to point this out to Ron, but Ron was having trouble with his wand again. Large purple blooms were blossoming out the end, and he wasn't much interested in anything else. Harry went to bed before anything else in his before anyone else in his dormitory that night. This was partly because he didn't think he could stand Fred and George singing, "His eyes are as green as a blackboard," or as fresh pickled toad. His eyes are as green as fresh pickled toad. His hair is as black as a blackboard. One more time. And partly because he wanted to examine Riddle's diary. Again, and knew that Ron was wasting his time. And knew that Ron thought he was wasting his time. Good grief. Harry sat on his four-poster and flicked through the blank pages, none of which had a trace of scarlet ink on it. And then he pulled a new bottle out of his bedside cabinet, dipped his quill in it, and dropped a blot onto the first page of the book. The ink shone brightly on the paper for a second, and then, as though it was being sucked into the page, vanished. Excited, Harry loaded up his quill a second time and wrote, "My name is Harry Potter." The words shone momentarily on the page, and they too sank without a trace. And then at last, something happened. Oozing back out of the page in his very own ink came words Harry had never written. "Hello, Harry Potter. My name is Tom Riddle. How did you come by my diary?" Those words, too, faded away, but not before Harry had started to scribble back. Someone tried to flush it down the toilet. He waited eagerly for Riddle's reply. "Lucky that I recorded my memories in some lasting way, in some more lasting way than ink. But I always knew that there would be those who would not want this diary read." "What do you mean?" Harry scrawled back, blotting the page in his excitement. "I mean that this diary holds memories of terrible things. Things which were covered up. Things which happened at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry." "That's where I am now," Harry wrote quickly. "I'm at Hogwarts, and horrible stuff's been happening. Do you know anything about the Chamber of Secrets?" His heart was hammering. Riddle's reply came quickly, his writing becoming untidier, as though he was hurrying to tell all that he knew. "Of course I know about the Chamber of Secrets. In my day they told us it was a legend that did not exist. But this was a lie. In my 5th year, the chamber was opened, and the monster attacked several students, finally killing one. I caught the person who'd opened the chamber, and he was expelled. But the headmaster, Professor Dippet, ashamed that such a thing had happened at Hogwarts, forbade me ever telling the truth. A story was given out that the girl had died in a freak accident. They gave me a nice shiny engraved trophy for my trouble, and warned me to keep my mouth shut. But I know it could happen again. I knew it could happen again. The monster lived on, and the one who has the power to release it was not imprisoned." Harry nearly upset his ink bottle in his hurry to write back. "It's happening again now. There have been 3 more attacks, and no one seems to know who's behind them. Who was it last time?" "I can show you if you like," came Riddle's reply. "You don't have to take my word for it. I can take you inside my memory of the night when I caught him." Harry hesitated, his quill suspended above the diary. What did Riddle mean? How could he possibly be taken inside someone else's memory? He quickly glanced at the door of the dormitory, which was growing dark. Yeah. When he looked back at the diary, he saw fresh words forming. "Let me show you." Harry paused for a fraction of a second and then wrote 2 letters. "Okay." The pages of the diary began to blow as though caught in a high wind, stopping halfway through the month of June. Mouth hanging open, Harry saw that the little square for June the 13th seemed to have turned into a minuscule television screen. His hands trembling slightly, he raised the book to press his eye against the little window, and before he knew what was happening, he was tilting forward, the window was widening, he felt his body leave his bed, and he was pitched headfirst through the opening of the page into a whirl of color and shadow. That's Harry writing in the diary. The little window page. Ooh, this is gorgeous. That artwork is just beautiful. He felt his feet hit solid ground, and he stood up, shaking, as the blurred shapes around him came suddenly into focus. He knew immediately where he was. The circular room with the sleeping portraits was Dumbledore's office, but it wasn't Dumbledore who was sitting behind a desk. A wizened, frail-looking wizard, bald except for a few wisps of white hair, was reading a letter by candlelight. Harry had never seen this man before. "I'm sorry," he said shakily. I didn't mean to butt in." But the wizard didn't look up. He continued to read, frowning slightly. Harry drew nearer to his desk and stammered, "I'll just go, shall I?" "Oh, Angie, stop flirting with me." Still, the wizard ignored him. He didn't even seem to have heard him. Thinking that the wizard might be deaf, Harry raised his hands. "Sorry I disturbed you. I'll go now," he half shouted. The wizard folded up the letter with a sigh, stood up, walked past Harry without glancing at him, and drew the curtains on his windows. The sky outside the window was ruby red. It seemed to be sunset. The wizard went back to the desk, sat down, and twiddled his thumbs, watching the door. Harry looked around the office. No Fawkes the Phoenix, no whirling silver contraptions. This was Hogwarts as Riddle had known it, meaning that this unknown wizard was headmaster, not Dumbledore, and he, Harry, was little more than a phantom, completely invisible to the people of 50 years ago. There was a knock on the office door. "Enter," said the old wizard in a feeble voice. A boy of about 16 entered, taking off his pointed hat. A silver prefect's badge was glinting on his chest. He was much taller than Harry, but he too had jet black hair. "Ah, Riddle," said the headmaster. "You wanted to see me, Professor Dippet?" said Riddle. He looked nervous. "Sit down," said Dippet. "I've just been reading the letter you sent." "Oh," said Riddle. He sat down, gripping his hands tightly. "My dear boy," said Dippet kindly, "I cannot possibly let you stay at school over the summer. Surely you want to go home for the holidays?" "No," said Riddle at once. "I'd much rather stay at Hogwarts than go back to that." "You live in a Muggle orphanage during the holidays, I believe," said Dippet curiously. Seriously, this pollen outside is going to kill me. "Yes, sir," said Riddle, reddening slightly. "You are Muggle-born?" "Half-blood, sir," said Riddle. "Muggle father, witch mother." "And both your parents?" "Mother died just after I was born, sir. They told me at the orphanage she lived just long enough to name me. Tom after my father, Marvolo after my grandfather." Dippet clicked his tongue sympathetically. "The thing is, Ron," he sighed, "special arrangements might have been made for you, but in circumstances—" "You mean all these attacks, sir?" said Riddle, and Harry's heart leapt, and he moved closer, scared of missing anything. "Precisely," said the headmaster. "My dear boy, you must see how foolish it would be to allow you to remain in the castle when term ends, particularly in light of the recent tragedy, the death of that poor little girl. You would be safer by far at your orphanage. As a matter of fact, the ministry is even now talking about closing the school. We are no nearer to locating the, source of this unhappiness." Riddle's eyes had widened. "Sir, if the person was caught, if it all stopped—" "What do you mean?" said Dippet, with a squeak in his voice, sitting up in his chair. "Riddle, do you know something about all these attacks?" "No, sir," said Riddle quickly. But Harry was sure it was the same sort of no that he himself had told Dumbledore. Dippet sank back down, looking faintly disappointed. "You may go, Tom." Riddle slid off his chair and slumped out of the office. Harry followed him. Down the moving staircase they went, emerging next to the gargoyle in the darkening corridor. Riddle stopped, and so did Harry, watching him. Harry could tell that Riddle was doing some serious thinking. He was biting his lip, his forehead furrowed. Then, as though he had suddenly reached a decision, he hurried off, Harry gliding noiselessly behind him. They didn't see another person until they reached the entrance hall, when a tall wizard with long sweeping auburn hair and beard called to Riddle from the marble entrance. "What are you doing wandering around so late, Tom?" Harry gasped at the wizard. He was none other than a 50-year younger Dumbledore. "I had to see the headmaster, sir," said Tom. "Well, hurry off to bed," said Dumbledore, giving Riddle exactly the kind of penetrating stare Harry knew too well. "Best not to roam the corridors these days. Not since—" Harry, he sighed heavily, bade Riddle good night, and strode off. Riddle watched him out of sight, and then, moving quickly, headed straight down the stone steps to the dungeon, with Harry in hot pursuit. To Harry's disappointment, Riddle led him not into a hidden passageway or a secret tunnel, but the very dungeon in which Harry had potions with Snape. The torches hadn't been lit, and when Riddle pushed the door almost closed, Harry could only just see Riddle standing stock still by the door, watching the passage outside. It felt to Harry that they were there for at least an hour. All he could see was the figure of Riddle at the door, staring through the crack, waiting like a statue. And just when Harry had stopped feeling expectant and tense and started wishing he could return to the present, he heard something move beyond the door. Someone was creeping along the passage. He heard whoever it was pass the dungeon where he and Riddle were hidden. Riddle, quiet as a shadow, edged through the door and followed, Harry tiptoeing behind him, forgetting that he couldn't be heard. For perhaps 5 minutes they followed the footsteps until Riddle stopped suddenly, his head inclined in the direction of new noises. Harry heard a door creak open, and then someone speaking in a hoarse whisper. "Come on! Gotta get you out of here! Come on now! In the box!" There was something familiar about that voice. Riddle suddenly jumped round the corner. Harry stepped out behind him. He could see the dark outline of a huge boy who was crouching in front of an open door, a very large box next to it. "Evening, Rubeus," said Riddle sharply. The boy slammed the door shut and stood up. "What are you doing down here, Tom?" Riddle stepped closer. "It's all over," he said. I'm going to have to turn you in, Rubeus. They're talking about closing Hogwarts if the attacks don't stop." "What do you—" "I don't think you meant to kill anyone, but monsters don't make good pets. I suppose you just let it out for exercise and—" "It never killed anyone," said the large boy, backing against the closed door. From behind him, Harry could hear a funny rustling and clicking. "Come on, Rubeus," said Riddle, moving yet closer. "The dead girl's parents will be here tomorrow. The least Hogwarts can do is make sure that the thing that killed their daughter is slaughtered." "It wasn't him!" roared the boy, his voice echoing in the dark passage. "He wouldn't! He'd never!" "Stand aside," said Riddle, drawing out his wand. His spell lit the corridor with a sudden flaming light. The door behind the large boy flew open with such force it knocked him to the wall opposite. Out of it came something that made Harry let out a long, piercing scream that no one but he could hear. A vast, long-slung, hairy body and a tangle of black legs, a gleam of many eyes, and a pair of razor-sharp pincers. Riddle raised his wand again, but he was too late. The thing bowled him over as it scuttled away, tearing up the corridor and out of sight. Riddle scrambled to his feet, looking after it. He raised his wand, but the boy leapt on him and seized his wand and threw him back down, yelling, "No!" The scene whirled. The darkness became complete. Harry felt himself falling, and with a crash, he landed spread eagle on his four-poster in the Gryffindor dormitory. Riddle's diary laying open on his stomach. Before he had time to regain his breath, the dormitory door flew open and Ron came in. "There you are," he said. Harry sat up. He was sweating and shaking. "What's up?" said Ron, looking at him with concern. "It was Hagrid, Ron. Hagrid opened the Chamber of Secrets 50 years ago." And that is the end of the chapter. Tomorrow we will read chapters 14 and 15. We're pretty close to being, we're almost done with this book. Not much more to go. All right, everybody. Have a lovely evening. I'm going to go feed my family dinner and we're going to go find a movie to watch. Night-night.